Right. So, what we discussed in the previous session, as far as the solution architecture itself is concerned, when we are working as a solution architect, from the context of Java solution architect role, we discussed even about authentications, right? So, authorization example, right? So, that part was discussed on a high level note. At the same time, previous, we discussed even about what are the different elements which are essentially important to have some solution architecture understanding. Followed by this, we have even discussed about architecture styles, architectural patterns, all that. Wherein today we are going to discuss about the solution lifecycle, because many of the people wherein I could see uh, one should understand about the lifecycle process, because we know when we develop any application, we know the process of SDLC, which stands for Software Development Lifecycle. So in connect to that, whenever we are working on these sort of applications, it's always important for us to know about the life cycle of solution architecture when we want to provide any kind of solution, all that, how the solution life cycle tasks will be, and how this can be categorized. Normally, when we try to understand about the solution life cycle, so when you talk about the solution life cycle task, right? So when we are trying to understand about the solution life cycle tasks and all, normally this will be categorized into three different parts. The one about the pre-deployment part, second one will be called as deployment part, the third one about the post-deployment. So these are the three basic things we will be there, right? That because this normally we categorized into three different parts. Again, I'm repeating, one was pre-deployment, second deployment, followed by the post-deployment. These were the 3 points. Now, when it comes to the pre-deployment itself is concerned, normally pre-deployment process will be of three different things, right? So the one about, yeah, right. So one about the business analysis, right? So whatever the business analysis we do, right? So in this context of business analysis, as I told you, so it's whatever the kind of business requirements followed by the kind of business constraints from the context of the customer. This is all something comes under the business analysis part. The next one about the technical requirements. This is what something which we must be uh, having an idea over that. So technical requirements, these technical requirements, either it can be use case analysis, or it can be a usage analysis, or it can be the quality of service requirements, what we are going to take, right? So all these things are comes under the technical requirements part. The third one, which is important as far as the process itself is concerned, when we try to understand this. Yeah, so when we try to understand this, this is where generally we call it as logical design. This is the third one. Logical design is the third one. When we talk about the logical design, whatever the logical architecture, this is where generally application architecture, integral part of systems architecture and all everything is what something which we have to create. Because in the previous sessions, even I told you, when you try to understand about architecture for any application, there will be of two different things. One is enterprise level understanding, at the same time solution level detailing. Enterprise level understanding, solution level detailing. Enterprise level understanding focuses more on the business perspective, business architecture, systems, applications, data, etc. Solution level understanding majorly focusing on the kind of solution what we are providing based on the non-functional requirements, all that. When it comes to the logical design, this is where generally the logical architecture of the application among the systems what we are using, among the functionalities, whatever are we developing and all comes under this category. This is where generally logical architecture comes into picture. So it's not only about the logical architecture, it's also focusing on the deployment scenarios. What are the different deployment scenarios do we have? So those deployment scenarios will also be taken into consideration under that. So these are the three different things whenever we are working on the pre-deployment. This is the first one. Okay, as I told you. So when we are working on the life cycle, when you try to understand about the life cycle being a solution architect, especially the first one about the pre-deployment part. Pre-deployment majorly focusing on business analysis, wherein understanding the business requirements, business constraints, etc. Next, technical requirements, which majorly focusing on use case analysis, usage analysis, all that stuff. At the same time, quality of service requirements, etc. Next one about the logical design, which majorly focusing on logical architecture, deployment scenarios, all that. Next one about the deployment part. So this is also one of the key and important. The next phase is called deployment. Right. So next one is about the deployment part. So when it comes to the deployment part itself is concerned, normally we will be categorized into two different parts. One is about the deployment design. The second one about the deployment implementation. Okay, two different things. Deployment design. Right, so deployment design is the first one. Next one, deployment implementation. Okay, this is the second one. Now, when you talk about the deployment design, majorly whatever the deployment architecture, because if you want to deploy any application, deployment architecture has to be created. So the deployment procedure has to be created, right? So what are the deployment procedure, right? So what are the things to be taken care of? Either it can be an on-premise application. So the kind of deployment we do by integrating our application systems and all everything very important. When it comes to the cloud level architecture and all, whatever the cloud level deployments we do and all everything were different. So when it comes to the deployment design and all, whatever the deployments architecture we do, followed by the kind of implementation specifications or implementation plans, right? So all these things are comes under the deployment design part. Now, when it comes to the deployment implementation and all, majorly whatever the required hardware is needed, because if you want to implement or if you want to implement the deployment, execute and deploy the application, it's always important for us to understand about what are the compatible hardware setup which is required. Followed by this, we must be ensuring whatever the required installation followed by the upgradation is required. And more or less something like when we are working for migration projects also, the same process will also be applied here. Next, we must understand about the configuration part, followed by the customization, etc. Because configuring the according to the business rules and government mandates, whatever are we doing, according to the right fit of the organization is always important. So in context to that, configuration as well as customization is needed. At the same time, we need to ensure whatever the development integration we do, followed by if there is any kind of pilot projects are we going to develop, right? So or else if there is any kind of prototyping pilots. At the same time, if there is any kind of production rollouts do we have, right? So all these things are comes under the deployment implementation, which will be part of deployment. The third phase is called post-deployment. So this is the final phase, I would say. Right, so this is the final phase, I would say, right? So which is called post-deployment. When you talk about the post-deployments, majorly post-deployment will be focused based on the operations, right? So whatever the operations are we going to do, this is all something comes under this part. This is where generally we'll be focused more on, right? So I can say this is all about the operations part. This is post-deployment. Okay, once the deployment, post-deployment operations, like whatever the kind of maintenance we do, right? So at the same time, if there is any kind of performance tuning we do, right? So what kind of techniques are we using for performance tuning? At the same time, if there is any kind of system enhancements and upgradations, right? So these are all something will be involved in it. So if we are being a solution architect or when we are trying to understand about the solution architecture, Java solution architect or something. It's always important for us to understand about what are the different solution life cycle tasks we have. Either it can be pre-deployment, it can be of deployment, it can be of post-deployment. All these things must be known to us well in advance. So of course, there is a detailing part. So how this can be done, point wise and all, everything will be explained. Let's say, for example, when we talk about logical design, how this logical design can be implemented by understanding the logical infrastructure, etc. At the same time, when you're talking about the deployment design and all, what and how generally deployment architecture has to be created. So that part I'm going to discuss the detail part, because this is not the time which I'm going to explain that, because which normally deviates the actual topic what am I supposed to explain to you. So this is what something which normally comes under the solution lifecycle tasks, which normally being a solution architect, Java solution architect, one must be good with. So this is not something I can say only for Java. Of course, when we are working as a solution architect, whatever the life cycle process are the tasks which are to be performed and all everything will remain the same. But as in when our course belongs to Java solution architect, hence on that regard, I am taking that example for your better clarification, right? So this is all about session today. If you have any questions, please go ahead.